At 2:22 a.m. UTC on the 16th of April, 2026, something happened high above the Atacama Plateau that forced a complete rethink of what we are tracking in our sky. Inside the control room of the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, 5,000 meters above sea level, a routine calibration turned into a moment that no astrophysicist is prepared for. Elena, a night operations technician, was doing what she had done countless times before: adjusting receiver gain, monitoring atmospheric interference, and running phase alignment across 66 high-precision antennas. The air outside was still, the sky perfectly clear, a textbook night for clean data. Nothing suggested what was about to appear on her screen. Then the interferometry plot refreshed. Her hand stopped mid-click. The signal wasn't noisy. It wasn't chaotic. It wasn't what you expect from a drifting interstellar object. What she saw was a trajectory so precise it looked artificial. The telemetry showed that 3I Atlas had just executed a micro-correction, an exact 1.42 degree shift. Not approximate, exact. That alone was enough to raise concern, but the next layer of data made it impossible to ignore. The new trajectory wasn't random. It formed a perfectly calculated path threading directly between the three massive stars of Orion's belt: Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. These are not small targets. Each one has its own dominant gravitational field, and navigating between them requires extreme precision. Yet 3I Atlas wasn't drifting through. It was aligning itself through a corridor that should be nearly impossible to calculate without advanced modeling. Then came the third detail. Its speed spiked to 87 kilometers per second, not because of gravity, not because of solar acceleration. The data showed sustained propulsion, controlled, continuous, and completely unexplained by cometary physics. Elena pushed her chair back so fast it hit the rack behind her. She didn't call her supervisor. She went straight for the encrypted uplink and contacted the European Space Agency control tied to the Gaia spacecraft. Her voice was unsteady, but her words were clear. It's not drifting anymore, it's navigating. That single statement reframes everything. Because if an object can calculate and execute a multi-star gravitational corridor with precision measured down to fractions of a percent, then it is not behaving like debris. It is behaving like a system with intent. The probability of a natural object performing this maneuver is effectively zero. This moment marks a transition. Until now, 3I Atlas was treated as a passive interstellar visitor. That assumption no longer holds. What we are looking at now is a case study in controlled navigation at a scale we do not currently possess. In theoretical physics, we often describe motion through gravitational systems using perturbations and slingshot effects. Objects gain speed by passing near massive bodies, exchanging energy in predictable ways. But those interactions are not clean. They involve chaotic variables and broad margins of error. What Elena saw was the opposite. This was precision, and that precision suggests computation. To pass between those three stars without destabilizing the trajectory requires continuous adjustment, real-time correction based on gravitational feedback. That implies onboard processing, not passive response, but active calculation. For months, 3I Atlas was grouped with previous interstellar objects, treated as a rare but natural occurrence. That framework is now collapsing under the weight of new data, because what we are seeing is not a random path shaped by gravity. It is a path chosen, and the fact that it leads directly through one of the most recognizable stellar alignments in our sky raises a deeper question: was this route selected for efficiency or for something else entirely? Because as the data continued to come in, it became clear that this wasn't just a maneuver. It was part of a sequence, and what came next suggests that threading Orion's belt was not the destination, it was only the beginning of something much larger. And what came next made it clear that this was not just a precision maneuver, it was a calculated operation unfolding step by step. Within minutes of Elena's transmission, confirmation began arriving from independent systems. The Gaia spacecraft verified the same 1.42-degree trajectory correction. That alone removed any possibility of instrumental error. But when analysts overlaid the updated path onto stellar models, the conclusion became unavoidable. 3I. Atlas had not simply adjusted its course, it had aligned itself with a gravitational corridor that required near-perfect timing and calculation. To understand why this matters, you need to consider how orbital mechanics normally works. Objects in space follow paths determined by gravity. Even when influenced by multiple bodies, their motion remains predictable within margins. This is the foundation of Keplerian dynamics, elliptical or hyperbolic orbits shaped by mass and distance. But this situation breaks that model. The 1.42-degree shift occurred at a point in space where no dominant gravitational body exists to justify it. There was no nearby mass large enough to create a natural deflection, no collision, no outgassing event visible in any spectrum. That leaves only one viable category of explanation: directed propulsion. And not just propulsion, but controlled navigation. When scientists simulated the path required to thread between Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka, the margin of error came out to just a few meters across distances measured in trillions of kilometers. That level of precision demands continuous correction, not a single adjustment. It means the object is reading its environment, recalculating, and responding in real time. This is where the conversation shifts from astrophysics into something far more complex. Because if an object can maintain that level of accuracy across multiple gravitational wells, then it must possess a processing system capable of handling enormous data sets instantly. In theoretical discussions, this kind of capability is often associated with advanced computational frameworks, systems that operate beyond classical limits. Some researchers have started describing this behavior using models inspired by the work of Michio Kaku, particularly his classification of advanced civilizations. Through that lens, 3I, Atlas is no longer behaving like a natural object. It is behaving like a Type 2 level system, something capable of harnessing and manipulating stellar-scale energy. That may sound extreme, but the data is forcing that direction of thinking. Because the velocity increase to 87 kilometers per second wasn't achieved through a simple gravitational slingshot. In a standard slingshot maneuver, an object borrows energy from a moving massive body, altering its speed and direction. But those interactions leave clear signatures, arcs, curves, and predictable energy transfers. Here, the acceleration is smooth, sustained. And most importantly, it occurs in regions where no such energy exchange should be possible, which suggests something else entirely. Instead of reacting to gravity, 3I, Atlas, appears to be using it. Think of it less like a rock being pulled and more like a system harvesting momentum. By entering a tightly calculated corridor between the Orion stars, it may be extracting rotational energy from their combined gravitational fields. Not passively, but actively through a mechanism we do not yet understand. This idea connects to a concept known as relativistic frame interaction, where motion through curved spacetime can be manipulated under extreme conditions. While still theoretical in human technology, the patterns observed here resemble controlled use of that principle. And then another layer appeared in the data. As the object approached the midpoint between the three stars, instruments detected a burst of high-energy radiation gamma emissions precisely timed with its closest approach. This was not random. The timing matched the exact moment when gravitational forces from all three stars reached a dynamic balance. That kind of synchronization is not accidental. It suggests that the object is not just navigating space, it is interacting with it. Some analysts now believe those gamma bursts may serve a dual purpose. On one level, They could be part of the propulsion system, helping stabilize or adjust the trajectory. But on another level, they may function as signals, structured emissions carrying information. If that interpretation is correct, then 3I, Atlas, is not just moving through Orion's belt, it is communicating within it. And that raises a critical question. If the object is capable of both precise navigation and timed energy emission, then who or what is it communicating with? Because, as the simulations continued, one conclusion began to stand out. The Orion corridor wasn't just a shortcut. It looked like a checkpoint. And if that's true, then the maneuver Elena witnessed was not simply about movement, it was about alignment with something waiting beyond it. And that's exactly where the next layer of data takes us. And that possibility of alignment, rather than simple travel, became much harder to dismiss once the next layer of telemetry was analyzed. As 3I, Atlas, moved deeper into the Orion corridor, instruments began detecting a pattern that did not match any known natural emission. The gamma-ray burst observed near the gravitational midpoint wasn't just energetic, it was structured. When analysts broke it down frame by frame, they found that the timing of each pulse corresponded exactly to the object's position relative to Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. That level of synchronization changes the interpretation completely. In natural systems, radiation is typically chaotic or follows broad physical laws tied to temperature and composition. But here, the emissions were occurring at precise intervals, aligned with external reference points. That suggests coordination, something actively linking motion and output. To understand the scale of this, consider what it takes to generate gamma radiation. These are among the highest energy photons in the electromagnetic spectrum. Producing them in controlled bursts while maintaining a stable trajectory at 87 kilometers per second requires an energy source far beyond anything associated with a comet. And yet, the object remains structurally stable. This brings us directly into the territory of mass-energy equivalence. According to established physics, converting even a small amount of mass into energy yields enormous output. But what we're seeing here is not a one-time release. It's sustained, controlled, and repeatable. That implies not just energy, but energy management. Some researchers analyzing the data from the Gaia spacecraft and ground-based arrays have proposed that these gamma bursts may be acting as spatial pings. In other words, the object could be scanning the environment ahead of it, mapping density, gravitational gradients, and potential obstacles in real time. If that's the case, then the Orion threading maneuver wasn't just navigation, it was calibration. By passing through one of the most gravitationally complex regions in our local sky, 3I, Atlas may have been fine-tuning its internal systems, aligning sensors, adjusting trajectory models, and preparing for a transition beyond the current region of space. That interpretation becomes even more compelling when you consider what lies ahead. Beyond the Orion belt is a relatively sparse region, a deep interstellar void compared to the structured environment of our local stellar neighborhood. Navigating that kind of space requires a different approach. Without nearby gravitational anchors, an object must rely entirely on internal systems to maintain course and speed. So, if you were designing a system capable of crossing that kind of distance, you would need a calibration phase. And Orion's belt provides exactly that: three massive reference points, perfectly positioned to test and refine a navigation system. But there's another layer to this. When analysts reviewed the timing of the gamma emissions, they noticed something unexpected. The pattern wasn't just aligned with position, it also showed signs of modulation. Subtle variations in intensity and spacing suggested that the signal might be carrying encoded information. Now, this is where the conversation becomes significantly more serious. Because if those emissions are not just energy but data, then 3I, Atlas, is not simply interacting with its environment. It is transmitting. The immediate question is, transmitting to where? The direction of the emissions, provides a clue. When mapped against the object's trajectory, the strongest signals appear to be oriented outward away from our solar system, toward the deeper regions aligned with the Orion corridor. That suggests a destination beyond our observational range. But it also suggests something else. If the object is sending information outward as it passes through a specific region, then that region may not just be a pathway. It could be part of a network, one that uses stellar alignments as relay points. This idea may sound speculative, but the data is pushing in that direction, because the precision of the maneuver, the timing of the emissions, and the stability of the system all point to one conclusion. This is not random. And if it's not random, then it has purpose. That purpose becomes even more concerning when you consider what the object might be sending. Because alongside the outward directed signals, there is evidence that the object is also gathering detailed information about its surroundings, including our own solar system. And that raises a critical possibility. What if the Orion threading event was not just about leaving? What if it was about reporting? Because, as the next data set revealed, the object wasn't just mapping space ahead of it. It was building a high-resolution profile of everything behind it, including us. And that's where the anomaly shifts from navigation into something far more difficult to ignore. And that shift from navigation to observation became undeniable once the next set of data was processed. As 3I Atlas cleared the midpoint of the Orion corridor, analysts began reconstructing the structure of the gamma emissions in greater detail. What initially appeared to be simple bursts of energy started to reveal an internal pattern, layered, consistent, and mathematically organized. This was not random radiation, it behaved more like a scan. When that pattern was mapped against known coordinates of our solar system, the implications became difficult to dismiss. The emissions aligned with orbital positions, planetary paths, satellite clusters, and even regions of high electromagnetic activity near Earth. In other words, the object wasn't just sending energy outward. It was sending information, and the information appeared to be a structured map. At that point, multiple facilities, including the European Space Agency and tracking systems linked to the Gaia spacecraft, shifted their focus. The question was no longer whether the object was behaving unusually. The question was what exactly it was recording and why. Because if those emissions represent a high-resolution scan of our inner solar system, then 3I Atlas is not just passing through. It is documenting. To understand how unusual this is, consider how we perform deep space mapping ourselves. Even with advanced probes, scanning an entire planetary system at high resolution requires time, multiple passes, and significant computational resources. It is not something done casually or instantly. Yet here, a 3-kilometer object is doing exactly that while traveling at extreme velocity and maintaining precise navigation. That implies integration, multiple systems working together seamlessly. Propulsion, sensing, data processing, and transmission all operating at once. This is not characteristic of a natural body. At the same time, another anomaly appeared in the telemetry. As the object moved closer to the outer edge of the Orion belt, instruments detected a localized distortion in the surrounding space-time field. This wasn't a large-scale gravitational effect like those produced by stars. It was subtle, confined to the immediate vicinity of the object, but it was measurable. That detail is critical, because it suggests that the object is not just moving through space, it is altering the conditions around it. Some researchers have begun describing this as a form of metric manipulation, where the geometry of spacetime is slightly adjusted to facilitate movement or stability. In theoretical physics, this idea exists, but only as a concept. We do not currently have the technology to test it at scale. Yet the data from 3I Atlas shows signatures consistent with that behavior. If this interpretation is correct, then the object is not relying solely on traditional propulsion. it may be reducing resistance or reshaping its local environment to maintain efficiency. That would explain how it sustains high speed without visible energy loss or structural stress. At the same time, the internal power signature derived from indirect measurements suggests something equally unusual. Instead of reflecting starlight like a typical comet, the object appears to be refracting it through its own field. In simple terms, it may be capturing incoming radiation and converting it into usable energy. This is where gravitational lensing enters the discussion, not as an observational effect, but as a potential energy mechanism. If 3I, Atlas, is using its own field to bend and concentrate incoming light, it could generate power without relying on internal fuel reserves. That would allow it to sustain long-duration operations across interstellar distances. Again, this is not something we can currently replicate, but the data points in that direction. And then there is the trajectory. As the object approached the final alignment near Mintaka, simulations showed that its path was not simply exiting the system. Instead, it was converging toward a projected coordinate in a relatively empty region beyond our local stellar neighborhood, a deep void with no obvious targets. At first glance, that might seem like a random endpoint, but when combined with the scanning behavior and outward-directed transmissions, it suggests something else. A rendezvous. Not necessarily with a visible object, but with a location, one that may serve as a transfer point, relay node, or staging area. The precision of the approach indicates that this coordinate is not arbitrary. It has been selected in advance. And that leads to a more serious question. If 3I, Atlas has just completed a full scan of our solar system and is now heading toward a predefined point beyond it, what is the purpose of that sequence? Because mapping, followed by transmission, followed by departure, follows a very specific logic. It is the logic of data collection and delivery. And if that is the case, then the Orion corridor was not just a path out of our region. It was a checkpoint in a larger process. That realization is why internal protocols began to change. Monitoring shifted from observational to defensive. Data access became restricted. And discussions that were once theoretical began to move into operational planning. Because the anomaly is no longer just about movement or physics, it is about intent. And as the next set of telemetry suggests, that intent may include something even more direct. Because, just before the object cleared the Orion corridor completely, it performed one final action. And that final action, subtle, brief, but unmistakable, is what shifted the entire analysis from observation to concern. Just before fully clearing the gravitational influence of Mintaka, telemetry showed that 3I, Atlas, made a controlled adjustment. It wasn't a major course correction like the earlier one. 4.2-degree shift. This was smaller, more precise, almost surgical. The object altered its orientation just enough to redirect a portion of its emission field back toward the inner solar system, back toward Earth. This wasn't a passive reflection. The signal pattern changed as the object reoriented. Analysts tracking the emission profile noticed that the gamma output tightened into a narrower beam, increasing its coherence and reducing dispersion. In simple terms, the signal became more focused, more intentional. And that matters, because in space, direction is everything. Random radiation spreads, directed transmission concentrates. The moment you see a signal narrow and align toward a specific target, you are no longer dealing with background noise. You are looking at communication. When the beam was mapped, its axis intersected with the orbital region containing Earth's satellite infrastructure communication arrays, navigation systems, and observational platforms. This was not a general sweep, it was a targeted alignment. At the same time, interference patterns began appearing in high-sensitivity receivers. Not disruptions, but overlays, subtle variations in incoming data that suggested an external signal interacting with existing transmissions. These patterns were consistent across multiple facilities, including those connected to the Atacama Large Millimeter Array and independent deep space monitoring networks. The conclusion reached by several teams was cautious but clear. The object was not just sending information outward. It was also engaging with the environment it had just scanned. This raises a critical distinction. Earlier, the behavior of 3I Atlas could be interpreted as observational mapping, measuring, recording, but this final maneuver introduces interaction. It suggests that the object is not only aware of its surroundings, but capable of selectively responding to them. That changes the framework entirely, because interaction implies feedback, and feedback implies awareness of effect. Now consider the timing. This reorientation occurred immediately after the completion of the Orion threading maneuver and the outbound transmission phase. In operational terms, that sequence resembles a closed loop. Gather data, transmit data, then verify or engage with the source. That is not random behavior. It is procedural. At the same time, internal reports indicate that high-level monitoring protocols were escalated. Facilities associated with planetary defense began coordinating data in real time. While no official statement has been released, the shift in activity suggests that the situation is being treated with increased priority. Part of that response is driven by the trajectory itself, because even as 3I Atlas directs signals back toward the inner system, it continues to move outward toward the projected rendezvous coordinate beyond the Orion corridor. It is not slowing down, it is not turning around. It is maintaining its exit path while still interacting with what it has passed. That dual behavior is important. It means the object does not need to remain in proximity to observe or communicate. It can operate at a distance, maintaining contact while continuing its course. That level of capability suggests a system designed for long-range operations, something built to move between regions without losing connectivity. And then there is the content of the signal. While full decoding is still ongoing, preliminary analysis indicates that the structured pattern observed earlier, the one resembling a mapped representation of our solar system, may have been updated during this final transmission. In other words, the object may have refined its data before sending it again. If that is correct, then the look back was not symbolic. It was functional. A final scan,